Welcome to day 2, day 3, day 2. We have a full day, and I just wanted to thank our sponsor this morning, caffeine. Thank you, caffeine, for making this morning possible. Thank you, caffeine. Welcome to day 2, the ultimate conundrum. You packed your bags, you're thinking about your flight. We have made it very difficult because there is a packed day 2. It's really good day 2. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you're up for this, because we are. So we're gonna bring up Kathleen Elmore, who's from Engage Us. She's gonna talk about what we've been hearing so much about this week already, the ecosystem of engagement. How do we bring the member experience in? Kathleen is amazing. We've had a relationship with her for years. I think you're gonna love it. Kathleen, to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Ryan for the great introduction and to Health Edge for this fantastic conference. As Ryan said, I'm Kathleen Elmore. I'm co-founder and managing partner of Engage Us. And so I'm here today to talk about the ecosystem engagement. Mainly, how do we drive consumer-centric experience, care, and engagement in this age of consumerism? So a little bit about me, why I'm qualified to speak on it. I started my career years ago at companies like Procter & Gamble. I like to say I was getting you to eat when you weren't hungry and buy things you didn't need. I was so happy to come to healthcare in 2005 and start using all those same methodologies to drive health instead of purchase. So before I dig into it, I want to set a little context of why this is so critical and why this is so critical now. I would argue that we are living as healthcare consumers in probably one of the, if not the most disruptive time. We're coming off a pandemic where trust was fragmented and it's not been rebuilt. We're living in a world of misinformation. TikTok is giving our kids health advice. We have consumers that were on GLPs last year that will find out that their GLPs are no longer covered, and it's been a game changer in their weight loss. We have consumers, and we do focus groups regularly, that understand that the Change Healthcare breach means their data might no longer be safe within their health insurance plan. And then finally, we have changing regulations that are constantly keeping us on edge as to whether or not we'll understand costs going into this ACA open enrollment. So consumers are living with all of this uncertainty, and at the same time, as Kevin said yesterday, we're facing cost challenges that we have never seen, and those cost challenges are going to be, some of it's going to be passed on to consumers. But at the same time, consumer expectations have changed. We are being bombarded with messages. We are living in a world of a tsunami of information overload. Traditional channels, social media channels, we're getting marketed to at the gas pump. And so how the brain makes sense of all of that information is to look for relevance. So if you're not hyper-personalizing your experience, it's just noise. Then we have so much choice, and we know from years of studying, choice depresses. We can go to ER, urgent care clinic. We can do asynchronous care in a plane, according to the recent commercial, and have the med waiting for us when we land. So lots and lots of choice that consumers have to sift through. And when they don't understand it, it causes inertia. As I said, the trust issues are still there and growing. And then finally, consumers have higher expectations. They're used to these experiences that they're getting outside of healthcare. And when they don't get them inside of healthcare, they can vote with their feet. Does anyone here know how many ways Starbucks claims to be able to personalize your beverage? Anyone? According to Forbes, 80,000 different ways you can personalize your beverage with Starbucks. So when it comes to a personalized experience, Starbucks has set the bar high. We have, though, another factor that's breaking this experience, and this is the multitude of non-integrated third-party vendors that add to this overall fragmented ecosystem. And so as I look across our own clients, we work with nationals, regionals, blues, you name it. I'm going to take you through about 6 of the things that we're seeing and how they're approaching solving for this consumer-centric experience. And really, as you already all know, and we've talked about it a lot this conference, it all comes down to data. So first off is accelerating data readiness. What does that really mean? We've talked about it a lot, so I'm going to take you through it through the consumer lens. We have tons of data in healthcare. My former Betty Crocker self would have killed for this much data on my consumers. But as we all know, more data is not better data. So in the consumer world, there's a golden rule that 3 types of data are critical when it comes to driving behavior. The first type is behavioral data. It's what we do, where we go, eat a Snickers, ride a bike. The next up is demographic data. That's who we are. Income, education, part of the country. And the last up is attitudinal data. Attitudinal data is what consumers say. Now, I wish it could be what they think, but we only know what they say they think, and what they say they think is rife with bias. So in the golden rule, tested over and over again by the likes of American Express, AT&T Wireless, all of these consumer companies, behavioral data is 5 times more predictive and more valuable than demographic data, which then is 5 times more predictive and more valuable than attitudinal data. Oops, sorry. And so where does behavioral data sit in a plan? In your claim system, right? So you all hold the keys to the kingdom when it comes to behavior change. So much so that you should go home and ask for a raise because you actually own the tools to solve for consumer behavior change. But I'll give you an example of why this behavioral data is so valuable and why, again, it's been proven over and over again. I used to work in television. We reached out to men 25 to 54 to find what their most watched channels were, not what their favorite channels, most watched. We were kind of deciding a cable lineup. Men back in the 90s bought the big ticket items, women bought more, but again, men bought the computers and the grills and things like that. So we did this statistical survey, and turns out men said CNN and History Channel. Some of you are smiling, right? When we took the Nielsen set-top boxes out of those same homes, what men were really watching was ESPN and TNT Wrestling, right? It was the 90s. Well, why the bias? Well, maybe men were trying to save what they thought were little watch channels. Maybe they were trying to sound smart. Or maybe the time spent on History Channel was a little painful and felt like twice the time spent on ESPN. We don't know, but we do know that attitudinal data is rife with bias. And we see this in healthcare too. We asked a commercial population, are you up to date with your colorectal screening? And we gave them the time frame. 7% said, yes, I am. When we looked into the claims data, 42% were up to date with their colorectal screening. I don't know about you all, I've had one, they're hard to forget, right? So net is we have to be harnessing claims. And the other behavioral data that's in your systems, as we talk about integrating and interoperability, is your engagement data. Claims is what a consumer did. Your engagement data is how we got them to do that. And that's going to become a critical piece of tying those two together as tightly aligned in creating this experience. And then to make matters even more complex in healthcare, we have this whole other data that other consumer companies don't have called health status. So what does data readiness mean for payer organizations? Well, first is identity resolution. In 2025, we still have clients that wrestle with, is Jay Smith in marketing the same as John Smith in clinical? Getting that right, of course, is key to creating that consumer-centric experience. Golden record. When I was at Digitas, a direct marketing firm in Boston, my client was AT&T Wireless. In the 90s, I was the business owner for the very first CDP that AT&T Wireless built. It was an end-to-end longitudinal repository for an individual's ongoing interactions with the brand. When you started roaming, we could see it. We sent you a message and said, hey, you need a different plan or you're going to have surprise charges. When your child got a phone and started using more minutes, we could see it and say, hey, it's time for a family plan. When you called the call center twice and had for the same disposition and had no resolution, we could send a love message without even a human intervening. All of those things created that individual experience, and that's what we're working towards in healthcare. Data activation. Just because your data is available doesn't mean it's ready. And this one, we've heard a lot about AI, but one of the things that clients have said over the last year and a half, trying to sort through their 40 different data puddles, is, won't AI be able to do this for me? So far, we've not seen it work well. It's better to get the data ready first and then have your AI be successful on top of it. And last is trustworthy data. And this is critical. Trustworthy data is really key because there's so many great attributes sitting in this behavioral data that you're going to want to use to personalize the experience. And if you can't trust the data, then you can't use these data attributes. And these data attributes have huge value. And when we start stacking them on top of each other, they really become a game changer in driving better outcomes, driving lower costs, right? For instance, when we send a text message, when we can get the eligibility file hits for a knee surgery, when we can get that in real time to flip a flag into the consumer automation platform, we can send a message to that person and say, hey, I see that you might need some kind of screening. Go to these 3 locations that are both in your network and much more cost effective for you versus going to the system, right? We don't say versus going to the system. We don't want to do that to our clients, but you see what I'm saying. And we ends up driving 25% more because we were able to get that specific data attribute. When we add the provider's name, we don't even have to say a provider recommends this screening. If we just say, call Dr. Smith to schedule, and we can put your doctor in it, that checks a lot of behavioral science boxes. It's authority, it's credibility, it's, oh, I actually must need one because this message is for me, it's not a public service announcement. Personalized savings. I can't tell you how many times we want to say when in a brand to generic outreach, this is what you're going to save. That's going to basically completely change the game for you if you can do it. But plans are saying, no, we cannot trust this data. So much so that we were recognized by NCQA for moving the needle on colorectal screenings for people of Hispanic descent. We wanted to take those same tactics and help a large plan with colorectal screenings for people of Hispanic descent. And they said, we can't even trust our ethnicity flags, right? So lots of value left on the table by not getting the data right. A lot of folks have talked about AI, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, so I'm going to focus on the things that have to do with behavior change. So first off, this scale, we've seen kind of similar spectrums. Most of our clients are on the left doing pilots that have low risk. That's great. We do have a few clients that are migrating to the right and doing some experiments with more contextual decision making. And I'll explain more in a minute. There's all kinds of use cases, and again, I want to get to the things that have to do with behavior change, but some fun ones that we're seeing are just using AI agents as messaging checks to make sure that things are in compliance. Is the phone number right? Is the provider right? All those kinds of things to take the burden off of folks as they're creating all of these communications to very personalized consumers. So this is the part I want to get to. This is called the engagement funnel. This funnel, whether you realize it's happening or not, is happening all across your plans. And it's happening in what I call a campaign-centric way. Let me explain. So come June, you say to yourself, hey, we're having a lot of ER visits that are unnecessary. Let's do a campaign. We're going to pull a file of all of the ER visits in the last 6 months that have a diagnosis code that could have been done elsewhere. That's called campaign-centric. What we want to get to is that N of 1 member-centric. And so all of this marketing funnel that you see, okay, who's the target? How am I going to segment? What channels am I going to use? What message am I going to say? This is going to blow up. And these decisions are still key, but it won't happen in this very rudimentary binary way. Instead, it's going to look like this. I go to the ER in January. Turns out I just had a bad headache. As I'm walking out the ER, I get a message that says, hey, Kathleen, I'm so sorry that you had a headache. I'm glad you feel better. You could have saved $500 on this visit. And so here's 3 urgent care clinics that are near your house, have a great reputation, and are in your network, and would have only cost you X. That, for a consumer, is much more powerful than 6 months later getting the, hey, don't forget, there's urgent clinics nearby you. So this N of 1 explosion is happening. Thinking about your strategy, it's no longer going to be hypothesis driven. You can go hypothesis free. And to a behavior change person, that's super exciting. Targeting is no longer going to be this point in time list pull. We're going to have always on journeys for these consumers that are targeted on the behavior data that they're doing. We're going to have no more segments based on these static variables. Instead, you're going to be dynamic segmentation. You're in one segment for this action. As you all of a sudden have a diagnosis, you move to that action. And the segmentation will be based on the action, not on the population. Why? I might be a data hound when I first get a medication, but for my mammogram, I don't need any more data. I've been doing it for 40 years. So these are the kinds of changes that AI is going to let us do, and it's already being adopted in the consumer world. So get ready, because it will come to healthcare. Content, think about your content management systems. You might have little fragments in there right now that you put together like a Vegas slot machine that form a communication. Now, imagine that in those cells, instead of fragments, it'll be engineered prompts, right? So much is changing in the engagement experience world. So over the long term, our plan clients are working toward this AI-enabled future. All of these pieces come together to basically help us create that experience, but you don't need to boil the ocean. The key point is just to get started. So Kevin talked a lot about interoperability, and it's so critical to driving experience. So we're seeing some bright spots in that, and also a shift from kind of a reactive next best action to a proactive next best action. You saw the kind of ecosystem slide already. This is our version. This is real work product from multiple national plans that have been blinded. This is affectionately called by our clients the spaghetti slide. We went through in various national plans, and we charted the journey that communications take from point of origin to actually hitting the consumer. And it's messy, and it's ungoverned, and it's siloed. In some cases, there are evergreen communications that the business owners left that are just triggered by a transaction that go out to a printer. That when we kind of did the inventory, we found communications that were unearthed like an archaeological dig. In fact, and the naming was quite interesting. We'd open a file that would say half crop bleed, and it was a clinical communication. So these are the kinds of just still rudimentary foundational areas to create that experience that need to be addressed. And so health plans must kind of come together to piece together these disparate systems, right? Who's your text channel? Are you bringing your email in-house? How are you measuring? Again, attaching those engagement data opportunities to the claims data in real time. So again, you send out an email, oh, you have an A/B test, A's working, but only for this population, B's working for that. You see in the claims data. Then you immediately say, okay, great, I'm gonna basically switch my volumes and do this instead. And you start learning and iterating to get better and better. And so when you start building that N of one experience, again, pick your use cases, start slow, show the value, and then build from there. You will see wild swings of improvement. Instead of just 5% and 10%, we just did a use case on brand to generic and 12x'd a very prominent plan's outreach. When I show you that stacked personalization, we couldn't even use half of them, right? So there's still money left on the table that we can go back and do that. We've heard a lot about the cost challenge, right? And so outside of the engagement and the experience, we are seeing all kinds of things happening across our plans. We still see some offshoring. That was kind of really big last year, but it's still happening this year. We're seeing a lot of insourcing of the engagement piece, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. I'm going to talk more about third-party vendor rationalization and optimization. We're also seeing some GLP-1 alternative programs. Again, trying to figure out what else can we do with consumers to both kind of wean them off, get them on off-ramp, but also maybe even prevent them going on. Supplemental benefits rationalization and optimization. This AEP will be really, really interesting, and it'll be even more critical to communicate personally to consumers, because they're going to find their benefits have been reduced, and maybe the costs are same, or maybe the costs are going to go up. So you think about that onboarding, it's not just the benefits book, it's the benefits that are critical to you, to get that in their head, because we know from the consumer world and the healthcare world, confidence in your benefits leads to satisfaction, whether it's CAPS, NPS, you name it. And finally, again, lots and lots of technology being brought to bear to help lower these costs. So I want to spend some time talking about ecosystem rationalization. So we just did a brand study across hundreds and hundreds of consumers. Now, as you learned yesterday, or you probably know from all of your life, the brand is a position. It's one word that you hold in the mind of the consumers. And that one word is what helps them differentiate in a sea of sameness or a sea of confusion of where they want to go. When I started out, my parents were like, do this brand because they've got your back. It was kind of that feeling. So now, when you come to healthcare, we did this study, and the one word we asked them to do, there was two things. One is, in many cases, it was a negative word, right? Confusing was kind of the popular word. In the other case, there wasn't much differentiation. They couldn't tell us what was really different about this plan versus that plan in terms of owning a word. And so what the cool thing is the opportunity is wide open for you all to be that winner and be first to market with owning whatever you want: simplicity, service, humanity, digital, whatever your stake is. And the reason it's important to stake it out early is once consumers think of a brand as something, it's hard to knock that off their throne. And I'll give you an example. When Mercedes first came to be, they had won all the safety tests, and they wanted to be the safe car. Well, Volvo already owned that position, and Mercedes were smart marketers, and they said, we're not going to knock them off that pedestal. Instead, we'll take prestige, and we all know how that turned out, right? So get that experience right so you can stake that position in the consumer's mind. And so what I love about this slide is finally, for the longest time, health plans have hoarded the administrative duties and given away the engagement duties, right? Your differentiation is your experience. You are a services company, and the services company's brand is the sum of their touch points with their consumer. So we're finally seeing this rationalization of the experience vendors that you've given away the experience to, and bringing that all in-house to start to create that competitive advantage of experience. And then, again, taking the duties off your plate of the administration duties, because you want to focus and elevate yourself on experience. So all of that is really leading us to employing hyper-personalization and behavioral science. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about hyper-personalization because it is so critical to driving a better experience and lowering costs and getting consumers to drive their outcomes. So let me give you an example. If I asked all of you to go get a colorectal screening, Christine might say she doesn't have time. Peter might say, oh God, I can't stand that awful prep. So if I said to Christina, hey Christina, go get your colorectal screening. By the way, the chalky liquid doesn't taste so bad anymore. And if I said to Pete, you could actually do a kit, and it's only gonna take 5 minutes, right? That's noise, because I haven't addressed what their barriers are. When we've done study after study, not behavioral data, or not attitudinal data, but actually in-market A/B testing behavioral data, and when a consumer gives us a barrier and it says no, and we ask what that barrier is, and we can apply a personalized barrier-breaking message, we turn 30% of no's into yes every time, whether it's AWV, annual wellness, colorectal, get your meds, you name it. So you want to be personalizing. And consumers have grown to expect hyper-personalization. One of my favorite examples is Netflix, because you get on there, they're A/B testing all the time what they're offering to you and what you click on, and then they learn from it and get smarter. They know what I watch versus my kids watch. They know where I left off on a show, and then when I come back in, they've backed up 10 seconds just in case I missed anything, right? Imagine that in healthcare when you call the call center and they already know your whole story and what you're trying to solve for. I love to give this example from my past about the epiphany of how powerful non-understanding versus understanding differences in behavior change are. And I used to work for Gillette. I worked for a lot of places, as you can tell. I worked there in the 90s as well, and it was the heyday of, they had launched in 92, men's centric cell. You guys are all familiar with that. It was the first super engineered, they had rotating blades, spring-loaded, Sure enough, they launched it to wild fanfare, and the razors flew off the shelves. And so they sat back in the ivory tower high-fiving themselves while they watched the cash register ring. Because everyone knows that Gillette makes their money in the blade sales, not in the razor. So the Suits and Home office said to themselves, gosh, we got to do the same thing and launch women's centric cell. And to be fair, it was the first time they didn't just slap a razor pink and launch it. They actually studied the contours of the legs, spring-loaded, you name it. Sure enough, wildly successful, razors flew off the shelves. They sat back and waited for the blade sales, but they never came. So they did a statistically significant quantitative study, and attitudinal data, what did they get back? They got back, I didn't need to buy one, right? Not helpful. Gillette were smart marketers. They knew they needed behavioral data. They brought women into their super secret shaving lab in South Boston to watch them shave. Super creepy, but great market research, right? So they found out that when men cut themselves, they throw the blade away, they blame the blade, throw the blade away, and buy a new one. When women cut ourselves, we blame ourselves. So there's never a reason to change the blade. And so for Gillette, that was just a profound epiphany that one action, buying blades, to get the same action from women, they needed a completely different strategy, right? And it's harder in healthcare. When I was at Cheerios, I had a really narrowly defined market. I had affluent moms who had brand new babies, and I needed them to do one thing, buy Cheerios. Now, I didn't even actually need them to eat Cheerios, because really, they weren't eating them, right? They were serving them to their baby. I just needed them to keep buying Cheerios. And as funny as that sounds, the segmentation, the levers, and the messages to eat Cheerios would be different than the ones to buy Cheerios. In healthcare, we have every walk of life, every age, income, education, health literacy levels, and we need you to not do one thing, we need you to do 300 things. And so going back to these ideas of these overarching segmentations, data hounds, happy wealthies, strivers, they break down because each action has its own motivators, levers, and barriers. So hyper-personalization is the only way that we are going to change this trajectory in healthcare. And as I went through this funnel, hyper-personalization lifts at every step, right? If we think about applying a segmentation to a switch from brand to generic, we looked at the past data and we made hypotheses. We said, these people look like they're more skeptical of generic. These people look like they're more motivated by savings. And when we gave them the messages they need, we more than doubled the brand to generic. Optimizing multi-channel based on personal preferences, 200% increase in home delivery. Increasing frequency for men worked for colorectal screening, but we didn't need it for women. It didn't make a hill of beans that we gave them another message, but for men it did. Highlighting the gaps, which gaps people need, increase the likelihood that they'll close those gaps by 2x. So I won't belabor the point, but each and every one of these pieces, you want to personalize, personalize, personalize. And when we did this for a large national plan, we stood up kind of agile teams. We helped them through this kind of hyper-personalization save $20 million in medical costs in 9 months. We're doing it for a different plan right now. In this brand to generic, the 12x equates to, at scale, close to $50 million. If we start doing it across their populations, and there's still money left on the table in personalization. So plans of all sizes are infusing behavioral science into all member touch points. And behavioral science, I know you guys experience it every day. Your electric company sends you a bill and tells you that you could be as good as your neighbors if you would only reduce your electric usage, right? That's super motivating. It's called social proof. We have, authority. Now, you saw in the pandemic, Dr. Fauci worked for half the population. Unfortunately, he didn't work for the other half of the population. Again, even in behavioral science, that need to personalize that experience to the consumer is critical. Then framing things, putting it into their language, their lifestyle, their culture, lifts response. Scarcity is one of the fun ones to talk about because we never run out of mammograms, but we can use scarcity in ways, for instance, if we're trying to get a home visit, we might call a consumer. Again, I'll use Pete. He'll say, great, I'll schedule it, but let me call you back. He never does. But instead, if I say, Pete, I have a really great person in your neighborhood next week, but I only have 2 slots left. Can I plug you in? Changes the whole equation, right? So you want to use these to break out of inertia, but you have to use these personally. This FOMO is the example I gave earlier. If a consumer says no, a great behavioral science tactic is to say, are you sure? Because that says to the consumer, wait, do I need to rethink this? And then if you could apply that barrier-breaking personalized message, you're going to turn 30% into yeses. Even things like choice architecture, how you offer up choices to consumers makes a huge difference. So there's a famous example in the book Nudge of where they put the chocolate milk versus the white milk, completely changed kids' choices, right? They put the chocolate milk in the back of that as you walk along the buffet. So it's just a little harder to reach, and it ended up driving, healthier choices. So you want to think about all of these things as you're working through it. So overall, we're really kind of in that next era of healthcare delivery that we need to use our data for member centricity. We are at that tipping point where if we don't, we won't survive because consumers want us to help them navigate. In fact, the plan that I mentioned with the 12X, they were really worried about blowback. They said, oh my gosh, we're gonna get calls to the call center because we're being way too, giving them really specific information. It turned out that they do a scale of was this helpful? We beat all our other communications by about 25%. Why? Because then consumers understand what we're actually asking them. A lot of times we try to put some emotional, fluffy language around things and it obscures the real message. And so pulling in all of these data attributes make a big difference in getting those consumers to act and take action. This data readiness can't be understated. And again, you don't have to boil the ocean. Start by your highest value use cases and bring them into a place that you can access them and use them to drive outreach and drive that experience. And then finally, for the plans that approach this interoperability and build this experience and bring in those key experience pieces in-house, send your administration out of house, because you want to focus on the experience, because the plans that do it right now will have a super first mover advantage in building a strong brand that matters to consumers. I always say healthcare brands should mean much more to us than our sneakers or our iPhone. So the time is now for us to get that done. Thank you so much. I talk fast, so I'm a little out in front of my time. Questions? Anybody pairing your behavioral data with engagement data yet? In kind of a real-time fashion? Oh, okay, over here? Yes.
Okay. So good morning. Thank you so much. Really great presentation. I have a question in terms of looking at behavioral data from a health equity perspective, especially when we're trying to make sure that we aren't generalizing populations, right? So that's, I think I get very concerned. I'm with a Medicaid plan, so Angela Mohameka, I'm the CMO for HCSC, and I oversee the Medicaid clinical plan. And the concern that I have is there are these assumptions that are made about certain pockets of the population, whether it's African American, people of African descent, Hispanic, et cetera, and suddenly they're this amorphous group, and we say things like, well, African American men don't go for colonoscopies. Well, I have 5 brothers that have all done theirs, right? So I think we have to be very careful with that data. So what have you seen in terms of best practice when it comes to thinking through health equity and using behavioral science to do that?
100%. That's a great question, is making sure that you're more vulnerable and kind of less active populations, which a lot of times fall on those lines, that you're understanding their needs. And so we work with the largest plans. We do things like focus groups. We came off of a set of 10 focus groups for people living with disabilities and people, Black people, people Hispanic. And it was really fascinating because they had some hypotheses going in that there would be kind of a silver bullet for folks. And it turns out that it's really the same issues that a lot of other people are experiencing in terms of disengaged, don't understand their communications, can't navigate their plan. but they're more acute. They feel them more often, they feel them to a greater degree. And so understanding kind of what their needs were allowed them to put together really very tactical programs that addressed their need. And a lot of times plans are worried about spending more. But I'll give you an example. We worked with a large plan that has a big duals population, and we said this social determinant of health around lack of transportation in the rural area that did correspond to certain ethnicities. They can't. The reason they're going out of network is they can't get to appointments, so they're just taking whatever they can get nearby, and they were having trouble scheduling appointments. We made sure that they understood their transportation benefit, which for dual is really confusing because Medicaid you have to use first. They might be two different vendors that you're using. This one has X amount of rides, that one has Y amount of rides. And it turns out not only helping the in-network usage, they got 10% more AWVs, but their grievances went down by 50%. So listening and acting for those populations, more vulnerable populations, is a key factor, and you can't assume. So you really have to listen to the consumer that's telling you things and understand how to act on it. So I love that you brought that up. Yes.
Hi, good morning. The question that I had was on the behavioral science. What resources would you recommend, especially for some of us in our teams, to be able to use some of those techniques, especially with our businesses and IT, the communication? There's just a lot of navigation that we could tap into to help support and improve some of that communication and navigation of writing requirements and just understanding the needs. Right. Even though I know this is very member-centric, which is wonderful, totally aligned with the health equity concern as well, but just trying to think of a different approach of using the behavioral science and what resources you'd recommend.
Sure. So there's a ton of great books on behavioral science. Most of them are kind of cross-industry. And I will say some people use loss aversion too much. I don't like to do that because I don't want to put fear in our members' minds or consumers' minds. So use it judiciously. But the book Nudge, Richard Thaler's like the father of behavioral science. We have resources that I'm happy to send you, our playbooks on how to use behavioral science. But the big thing is use it in an A/B fashion and use it in a way that feels really low risk. So for instance, if you're in the Medicare world and you've got to get all your communications approved and it's, this big long wait time, you could start doing things like the timing of 2 touches. Right now, you might send something out and a month later, no one responded, so you send out something else. Pull them together. That creates urgency. When all of a sudden I call you 3 times in the same week with an automated call, or I email you 3 times in the same week, if you just say the same message, it looks like bombarding. But if you escalate your messages to say, hey, this is my second call because I'm really trying to get a hold of you, please call this number, you're creating urgency in the consumer's mind that, oh, this isn't just a public service announcement about screening. They're trying to tell me something important, without scaring them, of course. But those are the kinds of easy behavioral science you can do without really taking a huge risk on things. But other than that, I always say A/B test if you can, because you'll find, again, with this attitudinal data, you'll find surprises. Sometimes you think something's going to work, and I'll give you a great example. There was a national plan that we worked with that had a gorgeous, new positioning from their agency. The colors were amazing in their commercials, and they used it in their retail to mail communications. And they did focus groups, and consumers said, oh my God, I love this postcard so much. I actually stare at it while I drop it into the recycle bin. So we ended up stripping all the fun out of it. It was a letter from a chief medical officer that talked about activating this benefit that you already had, and the importance of adherence. And so by taking all the fun out of it, it actually added the credibility, authority, and it ended up more than doubling response of people enrolling in the home delivery. So those are the kinds of tests you can do. And then once they did it, once they learned, they ended up doing other things with authority and credibility similarly.
So health plans have always had a knife edge that they've had to balance between being able to influence consumer behavior, because there's this underlying assumption that whatever we say is intending to reduce the cost and move me to a different place. The example you gave of walking out of an emergency room and getting a message that says you could have gone someplace less expensive probably doesn't square real well with the fact that I just got good care. So what has been your experience and how you square that circle? How do you find that place where we want to give good data because we have now especially really good data emerging, but how do we find that, I'll use the word nudge as you did, how do we find that balance place where we can get the credibility that we just don't have right now in this discussion?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I will say this, there's something in the consumer world called the honeymoon phase. When I have laid out a big amount of cash at the beginning of something, whether it's for a new car or you name it, you are looking for validating evidence that I, the consumer, made a smart choice. You've ever bought a new car and you see it on the highway and you're like, oh, that's a great car, I'm glad I bought it, right? You're looking for validation. It happens every time. American Express knows that if they don't get consumers sticky and using their card in the first 3 months, they can do all the messages they want at re-enrollment and re-up time, and it's falling on deaf ears. They need to get them going in those first 3 months. So your onboarding is critical. But again, your brand is the sum of your touches. So you can't talk to lighters unless you're getting the foundation right? Can I get a human on the call center if I want to? Is your digital 2 clicks away, or do I have to do 7 clicks to get what I want? You want to be able to get those foundational pieces right to start building that trust. Now, your point about asking them to do hard things, right? 2 things. One is consumers always want to know what's in it for them. That goes to that personalized savings message, right? And oh my gosh, how many people know the phrase, you may be covered? Have you ever heard that from your plan? You know what that says to a consumer? If you don't know if I'm covered and you're my health insurance plan, who does, right? So we've got to get more personalized to build that trust that we know what we're talking about, that there really is a payoff. I will say, when we were doing these disability focus groups, we asked people living with disabilities, do you know what is covered? They actually are so intense in the system, this group was, that they did. They knew what their benefits were. But how to navigate their benefits was a completely different story. When they were not being able to get a specialist, I said, well, did you call your health plan? They were like, why would I call them? When they couldn't afford their medication, I said, did you call your health plan? No, not at all. And then another consumer who was on that same plan was like, oh no, you gotta call them because they'll actually find programs for you. So you've gotta make sure that you are communicating not just the benefits, but the support that you give them to help navigate those benefits. And right now, they're not trusting you for wellness and quality of life and all these other glamorous wellness things. But the one thing they actually want to trust you for is how to help them navigate these increasing costs. And so get that onboarding right. Make sure you're personalizing so that you're helping them understand this win-win relationship of asking them to use the system. We have one plan actually that's experimenting with the idea. They've decided that a colorectal screening is the difference between a system and a strip mall is $700. They're toying with the idea of actually splitting that with that windfall with consumers and seeing what it does. So do some test and learn too, but you're absolutely right. Until we get trust, asking them to do those hard things is met with skepticism. So get that, start building that trust through predictability, a good experience, living the experience that you promised through that position, whether it's simplicity, service, humanity, you name it, and then we'll start to win these consumers back. Oh my God, we ended with perfect timing. This was like, so thank you so much. Again, thank you to Health Edge. I will be around if you have any other questions. I love talking about consumer engagement. Thank you.